This week on the latest episode of The Big Show, the proliferation of challenging images in the film and television industry has filled audiences with hope and pride, but also trauma. Mental health expert Dr. Ivan Walks joins us to help us navigate these on-screen challenges and to discuss how we alter our perspectives to maintain a positive outlook. We'll have all that and more on episode 444 of Keeping It Real with FilmGordon. Let's go. All right, and welcome to the latest episode of Keeping It Real with FilmGordon. I am Tim Gordon, joined by Charles Kirkland Jr. How are you, sir?
I'm pretty good, except for I thought we were going to talk about the Golden Globes. What's going on, man? This is a heavy conversation we've been ready to have.
All right, I'm gonna leave that right there. Let you simmer there. And also, I want to introduce a man who professionally I have a great deal of respect for. Have known him for over 2 decades. Literally in real life, one of my closest friends on the planet. So anytime we can get that brother on the air, we mix some medicine, some science in with film. Always, Dr. Ivan Walks. How are you, kind sir?
I'm doing very well, gentlemen. Good to be with you.
It's
honored to be in your presence.
That was your greeting right there, bro. That's your greeting. That was it.
Ivan, I'm honored to be in your presence. I don't know about Tim, but I thank you.
I'm honored to have Ivan, man. I just want Ivan to just. I'm gonna hit him in the back and get him to move around some because right now he kind of stiff. But brother, I'm glad to have you on today, man. And I'm making light early because the stuff we're going to talk about today is real heavy, and it's inspired by a conversation that I had with Ivan earlier this week that I had watched. I think the breaking point was the Whitney documentary because I watched it. I watched the Woody Allen, Mia Farrow series on HBO. I watched, I guess a couple of weeks ago, I saw the Belushi documentary, which was really, really heavy. The Tiger Woods documentary, really, really heavy. And that's not even counting Judas and the Black Messiah. That's not counting the U.S. versus Billie Holiday and all the other films that we've watched over the last 4 months, Charles, going into award season. So you can understand that for me, this is a very real conversation that I want to have. And it was funny because I put a post up on Facebook and, I said, hey, I didn't really tell people that, I have a support network of people I can talk to, but everybody's not me. And there's a group of people out there that may be isolated, maybe trying to deal with this stuff. And so Dr. Walks, with full disclosure, you and I have gone to film screenings for the better part of the last 20 years together. And we've seen some stuff in theaters, and not just stuff we watched on screen, but other people's reaction to stuff. Ivan, were you with me when we saw Les Miserables and the guy burst out crying at the end when Hugh Jackman was singing? Were you with me that day?
I was not there with you. And when
Well,
you say
the story, though, right?
When you say the guy, that's not like I have a friend who's really you. That wasn't you.
No, I'm saying no. It was funny because I must admit, man, and Ivan will back me up on this one. The Tim you're looking at right now is the mature, seasoned professional. When Ivan met me, I was young. And I was doing some stuff that now I am very ashamed of. Like I laughed at the guy, not understanding that the guy was in some real pain. That if whatever affected him that made him react in that way. And of course, I've teased people, colleagues like Brandon Phibbs, and maybe not Nell Minow. I don't tease her when we cry.
Nobody teases Nell.
Did I tease you once, Charles?
Once.
I'm apologizing, man.
Episode 434.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, man. My apologies because again, to me, as I said, this is a real issue. So, Dr. Walks, As we're talking about dealing with this, and in light of the pandemic situation and everything being shut down last March, people were home and being able to stream more movies probably than they would normally watch in any given year or month or time. We're dealing with the tragic deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and countless other Black folks that we don't say their names, but we're dealing with that. We're dealing with a divisive situation in our country with a very strained political system. So, so many people out of work. Charles, of course, I've commended him on air and off air about how he has work where he works. Now, I don't call it food bank work, but work where he's out helping to feed people. So this is a very, very difficult time. And then you add these images that people are ingesting on top of that. Ivan, talk to us about the totality of all that and how that will impact somebody's mental health.
So the show is how long? We have how many hours do we have? Look, it's a lot to unpack. It's a lot, and as I'm fond of saying, I've been black a long time, and and there has been a lot going on that we as as black men and as black folks and as people, period, have had to deal with. But let me go to where you started, FilmGordon. Let me go to the movies. I've met a lot of people who make movies over the years, mostly hanging out with you. And I'm still waiting to meet the one filmmaker who says to me, "Oh man, look, I'm just trying to make a movie. I don't want it to touch anyone. I don't want it to impact anyone. I don't want anyone to have an emotional response to my film. I'm just trying to make a movie." So when is that person going to be on the show?
um,
Okay,
I'm, I'm
hearing none. I mean, when we, in all seriousness, when we talk about keeping it real, we have to recognize that filmmakers, people who create stuff, people who write songs, they're writing from a place of, man, this has touched me. This song lyric, this story has touched me, and I want to share that with you. I don't really want to make a movie. I want to share something that has touched me, that has impacted me with you. So the gentleman crying in Les Miserables, all the folks who are leaving the movies feeling some kind of way. This is what the filmmaker strives for. The filmmaker strives to express something in a way that's going to touch you. And everybody's not touched the same way. I remember being asked by the studio that made Boys in the Hood, a classic American film. And Dr. Walks, we'd like you to come to the studio and screen this movie and let us know what you think. It was in the Los Angeles Times. Uh, Black psychiatrist says there'll be violence when the movie premieres. Everybody poo-pooed it. I felt like beating somebody up after I saw Boys in the Hood. What happened when the movie was released? It was violence in theaters across the country. Does that make me a prophet? No, it makes me a brother who was impacted by somebody telling a very real story, because I grew up in Southern California. I lived in South Central LA, and that was a story with which I was very familiar and impacted me personally. So when we see movies that impact people that look like us, somebody is telling a part of our story, and it's touching us and it's reaching us. So the filmmakers are pretty good at doing that. They are really good at doing that. So it's not that something is happening that's unexpected. Well, first of all, the studio thought that we were crazy when we said that the movie was going to inspire, because it wasn't their story, right? They didn't get it. And so I think when we look at things that impact us, that don't impact other people, it's not their story. They don't get it. They don't get it the way we get it. And so we get frustrated and we try to tell them, "Hey, do you all know what's going on?" And we start saying the names, and we are impacted differently by George Floyd and seeing somebody tortured on television for 8, 9 minutes. Because they won't show that. They won't show that normally, right? But it's like, remember back in the day, National Geographic. Now I'm old. I said I've been black a long time. I remember National Geographic. They used to show black women with no tops on because they were in Africa, and somehow it was different. But you could watch television, general television, and they would show us differently because they perceived us differently. They valued us differently. And so from way back to just how the news would cover us to how the filmmakers cover us, it's different. So I'm not going to just rant for the next couple hours, but I'll take a breath and stop for a minute. So but that's the answer to your question, Tim. The answer to your question is people do things because it impacts them and they want to share that with us. That's what
Oh,
the movies are.
okay. So one of the other things that I wanted to bring up, Charles has heard me say this, and I've talked to other film critics about this as well, is that as a film historian and someone who you both know that I studied film,
Yeah.
and very much that what I've discovered and found out is that when you go back and look at the history of our films, and I'm going to put a percentage on it for the first time, I would say 75 to 80% of the movies that tell our story historically are very traumatic to watch. That's not talking about just Roots, the autobiography of Jane Pittman. I was watching about a month ago, Once Upon a Time When We Were Colored. Very traumatic story when a young boy is hanging out with his grandfather at a parade, and it is a KKK come marching down the street, and he's intimidated. And Al Freeman Jr., Charles, you've seen the scene where he's holding the ice cream, and he's so mad he holds it, and the ice cream is all over. I'm like, dude, it's very difficult, and I don't think mainstream media understands what being black represents when you have to continuously watch images of you being marginalized, being demonized, being radicalized in whatever eyes form that it takes. It is very, very disparaging. And as I said, over a while, those things start to manifest itself in the ways that people get depressed, that people get angry, that people get anxious. I mean, Ivan, am I making sense here?
You you're making sense, Tim. You always accuse me, and I'll own it, of being the angriest man in America. I but in my profession, I listen to a lot of pain, and the movies you're talking about show a lot of pain and try to get us to feel that. As I said earlier, they want us to feel that. So when we're looking at other human beings in pain, and we can relate. We should relate because we're people, right? We should. When I see somebody, you mentioned earlier about the gentleman crying at Les Miserables, and you being the younger, less empathy filled Tim Gordon, and
Right.
and kind of laughing at him a little bit. Um, but we're supposed to be able to connect with our fellow humans around things that hurt them, things that inspire them. We're supposed to understand that. That's why we tell inspirational stories, hoping that we tell we tell those to our people with whom we interact, right? Well, let me tell you about this person because we want to inspire them. We want stories to connect with the people to whom we're telling the story. I'm back to that. I'm going to keep coming back to that because here's what happens. All of those stories that we talk about, what are they? What Roots is hard to watch, especially because it's so long and there's so much abuse in it. But what is Roots actually? Roots is a story of triumph, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, but before we get to the triumph, my goodness, man, there's a lot of pain before the triumph.
So what do we
Kunta
do with
Kinte
so
loses.
okay,
Look,
all right.
And I
Let's
think that
look at let's first understand that there are movies. Um, you and I have seen a couple of movies where there is no triumph. It's just it wasn't a movie about people of color, but my favorite movie to hate, A Simple Man. There was no triumph in that movie. Never has one man been treated so badly by everyone he knows, by everyone he cared about, as in that particular movie. And I left the movie going, "What the?"
Charles, that's an inside joke. I once see what Ivan won't say is that I once took him to a screening, and I had seen the film before and thought it had some value and merit, and I
Wrong.
invited my friend who was in a very difficult personal situation to go watch this movie, and it's the only time in our history. I think you talking about being angry. He turned literally into the Incredible Hulk minus the green, leaving that screen, and it was not pretty at all. But I get it. I understand, like you said earlier, Ivan, that these movies are supposed to kind of give us some sort of emotion. You either laugh at a film, you're kind of horrified by what you watch. Sometimes they make you mad. There's some reaction if it's an effective film or even an ineffective film that it should make you feel something. But I guess part of what and bringing it back, and I know Charles had a question, bringing it back to where we started is that we're talking about the steady stream of negative images that have literally traumatized folks. I was thinking about, Charles, before I throw it to you, I was thinking about Antebellum. A film that I really wasn't a big fan of that had this kind of surprise hook. But before you get to the surprise hook, you got to sit through an hour and a half of like unnecessary torture and pain and the killing and enslavement of Black folk. And I'm like, in 2020, is this what we really need right now? I mean, I get and understand what you're trying to do, but as you said before, Ivan, it's a story of whatever it is, triumph, a story of inspiration, but you got to sit through a whole lot of challenges before you get to that payoff, supposedly at the end. Charles?
I was going to say, the Black American, African American experience historically is a story told through trauma of the experiences that we've had. So a lot of times it becomes, is this movie for us to see, or is it for others to see to so that they can relate to our experience? Because I know we talked about a movie like Detroit that came out a couple of years ago. I'm like, we've seen the bombing of and the abuse that police do to Black people. Well, do we really need to see this? And again, at the end of the movie, there's just no redemption. There's no joy. There's no overcoming. And so you need the theater being frustrated and angry. What do you do in a situation like that when you come and you said it yourself, you come out of the theater and you're just the Hulk about what you've seen? What do you suggest to people who've gone through that experience, saying this is not a movie that I needed to see? What do I do?
So I mentioned earlier that there are that movies tend to inspire us one way or the other. And sometimes I think what the filmmaker is doing isn't just trying to make us angry. I don't know that I'm sure people are people. I'm sure there's some filmmaker. I want to make the whole world angry. Let me make this movie, right? I don't know. I've never talked to anybody who has said that to me. Um, there are there are a lot of opportunities for us to take what we feel and just go out there and burn stuff down. And we see that. We see people leaving wherever they are for whatever reason with emotion and putting it in a place where they can just get it out. So when someone asks me, what do you do? At the end of the story is all of the what do you do in terms of starting an organization, starting a movement. One of the brothers in my church got the other brothers together to take these backpacks to a homeless shelter for men because it was a positive thing to do. We can take our emotion and put it any place we want to put it. The challenge is how do we make a good choice? And I think that gets back to your question, Charles, and then also to Tim's larger point. Hard to do that stuff by yourself, right? it's hard when you, and so that's why something that Tim mentioned earlier. That's why during the pandemic, it's been even harder for many of us because we are by ourselves. We feel isolated. We have lost so much during the pandemic, and so when you put on top of that a story of somebody who has lost everything, and you're waiting at the end for, okay, do they get better, right? No, they die alone. What the? Why am I watching this? Right? What do I? Where do I put that? And something Tim has mentioned is that my phone will ring at any time. Thank you, Tim. And it'll be Tim calling me to say, man, and so he needs to just he needs to get something out. I think we all need a place to do that. And for some people, it is a good friend who will listen. For some people, it is a spouse who will listen. For some people, it is a church group that will listen. It's their Bible study who will listen. It's their fraternity. It's their sorority. It's their book club. It's some place where they know that people care about them, because the underlying message in a lot of those things that Tim mentioned is that people don't care about us. We are devalued. We are mistreated. We are shown with no tops on. We are shown being abused. There's a lot of bad stuff that happens to us, especially on film. And so where do we take it? We take it to some place where we can get some help processing it. That's how you get from the I want to burn everything down to how can I use this in a way that's constructive.
All right, and I love that point, and I think that's really good. Wilson Morales has joined us from blackfilmandtv.com. Wilson Morales, meet Dr. Ivan Walks. Dr.
I have
Ivan.
met Wilson
I
Morales.
figured he had to be somebody because it was like he got the suit on. I'm like, this guy's talking like a scientist, you know. I'm like, I know he ain't no regular critic,
I'm so sorry, Ivan, you having to go through this. This is what we
you know,
do
but I'm
every
like,
here.
you know, just 30 seconds into his conversation, I was like, this guy, like some sort of tech guy or scientist, like Stephen Hawking's like, no, I'm just kidding.
All right, so to his point, I think part of the next question I want to ask is that, when I brought this up earlier, as I said online, I was talking about what do film critics do. It's a two-pronged question. Part one is for folks who don't do what we do. It's easy for people to say, well, I can stay away from these images because I just won't turn them on, or I won't watch them, or I'll find something else to do. But in a case like the three of us, outside of you, Dr. Walks, people who have to watch this stuff because these are interviews we need to do, these are reviews we need to do, these are things we need to cover. Traditionally, Dr. Walks, that award season is always heavy anyway. We don't put out feel-good films around award season, so all the stories are heavy. But I think there's an extra emphasis on heavy in 2020 because A, the award season went on an extra 2 months. B, they socked us at the end with these stories where the FBI were infiltrating and hunting down Black people in the USA versus Billie Holiday, Judas and the Black Messiah. There's the MLK FBI. There's just so much stuff. So what is your suggestion for people who are industry folk? What do they do in order a coping mechanism, or is it much of what you just said, before about different support groups?
So, first of all, understanding the difference matters, and I just want to highlight what you said, Tim. You said that people who have to do these aren't your words, but this is, I don't know what you said. I'll tell you what I heard. What I heard you say is that there are people who, because of the kind of work they do, are differently impacted or more severely impacted or more frequently impacted or have a lot more thrown at them of certain kinds of things. Um, quiet as it's kept, I'm a psychiatrist. My job is to listen to people with some very challenging stories. And what do psychiatrists do when they are inundated with people? I have yet to meet the person that says, yeah, hey, Dr. Walks, I came to see you because everything is great. Man, I just won the lottery. The owner of the company decided they would just give it to me. People struggle. People struggle. And sometimes in the work that we do. So I'll broaden it a little bit beyond only the film critics to other people that have jobs where it's your job to take it. You know, it's like somebody punching you in the face. It's, just take it, just take it. Okay. Again, it's a matter of recognizing that what you're in the middle of is challenging. So many times we try to be just tough. You know, nothing bothers me. I'm just no. Somebody asked me, well, what do psychiatrists do? I said they talk to other psychiatrists. People who are therapists have therapists. They have supervisors that they talk to. They have other folks, and a lot of therapists are in therapy, right? So I think there's this first of all, and I don't know where the other people are, but all of y'all look like some real tough, hardy, manly men, right? So there's all that masculinity there, right? And part of that is we're supposed to be tough, which goes back to the first thing you started with, Tim, as you know, there's a guy over there crying in Les Miserables. What's wrong with him, right? I know that was you before you got, mature and seasoned and wise, but there's still a lot of that where we look at somebody who is showing the fact that they're impacted by something, and we kind of help them believe that something is wrong with them. They ought to be able to just hold on and just take it.
Mm.
We need to be very clear that especially those of us that deal with difficult situations all the time, don't just say, I can just take it, because there's no need to. Not that you can't. I'm not calling anybody soft. I'm just saying you don't need to. We need to be able to open up to each other. And the three of you guys that are on this screen with me, you guys already know each other. Why not open the conversation to some of the things that bother you? As you did, Tim, much to your credit, you opened the conversation by putting up that post about this is a lot. It's a longer award season. It's a heavier award season. It's coming after all this negative stuff. It's coming after, pick one, George Floyd, Kobe Bryant, different kinds of death, but different kinds of trauma, but still trauma for people, particularly folks that look like us. So I think the first step is recognizing that it's a heavy lift. And I say this a lot to people. I say, when you go to IKEA and you buy something, right on the box, it'll say 2-person lift, right?
Yeah.
And I think that we have to recognize that life is a 2-person lift. It is very hard to go through life picking up everything that's dumped on you by yourself. So if we allow people, if we are generous and empathetic and we allow people to say when they're in pain, it's a huge start. It's a huge start. You don't have to try to fix anything. All you have to do is to start off by saying, man, you look like that's really touching you. And the person can go back and say, yeah, it is really touching me. That opens a conversation that allows someone to unburden themselves. And you don't have to be a psychiatrist, a therapist, or sociologist, or anybody else to recognize that another human being is in pain and that it's somebody that you know. I'm sure if Charles or Wilson came by Tim and their arm was looking like it had been really severely injured, you would say, "Hey man, can I take you to urgent care? Can I wrap that up for you? Can a brother get you some ice?" We are happy. Well, okay, Wilson, you're right. Tim would not do that, but other people would do that. I think we have to look at psychological challenges, psychic pain, the same way we would look at physical pain. And I won't go, full tilt scientist on you, but there's really no difference between one kind of injury and another kind of injury. And what you're talking about, Tim, you're talking about things that injure us. And we had talked a long time ago about doing this regularly, about looking at the mental health aspects of the things that we see and digging into the particular movies and the particular kinds of emotions they raise in people. And, I think it's a useful thing to do.
So Wilson Morales, you just getting here. So we're talking about searching for Black joy in the movies. And, of course, I've been a vocal critic that I think that a lot of these films are really heavy, and a lot of the stuff we have to watch, man, is just to a point gotten to me. So I had to reach out for some help. How are you coping, man, with all of the stuff? Because you watching as much stuff as I'm watching. You may be watching some of the stuff earlier, but we're seeing all of the same stuff. Have you been having any challenges around, I'm talking about from an emotional standpoint, behind any of the content that you've been watching? And if you have not, how are you coping and able to kind of like have your emotional, your mental force field up, excuse me, where you're deflecting all of this stuff and it's not bothering you?
You know, the funny thing is, we've all been doing this for decades, not years, decades. And you get to a point where you can compartmentalize, you know, the films, you know, based on what you, when you know you're going to see a certain films, you're mentally prepared to see certain things. You know, that's what you go in for, you know. So I can watch a movie and the minute it's over, I'm doing something else. It's not going to stay with me and stuff like that. You know, there's certain films that, you know, at some point get to you. You know, I can think back to films that really got me, like was I think the 9/11 film that Nicolas Cage did, you know, sometimes you can get emotional when you're in a room full of people and there's a certain movie that comes out and it affects everybody around you. And that vibe gets to you as much as you want to create this force field in your mind. You know, like, I'm not going to let it get to me. But then you have the person next to you sniffling, like, you know, whether it be a death scene, an emotional scene, you know, it may get to you. But for me, you know, I can channel it out. You know, it's like, okay, what's the next thing? Because I knew what I was going to expect. You know, it's a different thing when, if you're watching, you know, when you're watching a movie that's based on a true life, you already know the ending. You know, it's a question of whether or not the execution of the ending is different than what you already know from what you've read. You know, I tell people all the time, like, why people should see, and this is not a film, but Roots or any of these slave films, because at the end of the day, you know, today's millennials are reading the stuff, but they don't know, there's no visualness to this. And when they see it, you know, as they saw what happened with George Floyd, now they know, you know, these visual films gives you context to what you've read about, but never experienced probably. And so, in watching movies, I know what I'm going to see. Like, whether it's, you know, especially like you said, you know, some of these movies are too deep, you know, and they speak to us, you know, like whether it's a Spike Lee film and he wants to inject Black culture and Black history, you know, or if it's a biopic. If it's a biopic, you know where it's going to go, especially if it's not a happy ending. Judas and the Black Messiah, you know, we've read the story, but we didn't know until you see it. You know, and it's their interpretation in terms of the producers and the directors. They know the impact they wanted to give you by creating that scene. Some films can just give you the context of words, like, oh, this happened, you know, and then others is like, no, we want to show you how it probably happened. So that way, you know, as opposed to just reading it. So I don't, you know, I'm not saying I'm an expert at it, but I know how to channel things out.
All right, so Charles Kirkland, you've heard me say on this show that Ava DuVernay's award-winning documentary, actually not documentary, award-winning TV limited series, When They See Us, I've told you on the air several times, I've tried to watch it. I can't get past the first 15, 20 minutes, man. And I actually told her. So that one was a challenge for me. And I was also thinking about a film I saw one day. I walked in for a 2:00 screening and didn't know what the movie was. And it was called Son of Saul. And I sat down, and here's a story about a man whose son has died during the Holocaust. And I was like, wait a minute, that's what we're doing right now? I wasn't prepared. So I was laughing.
Come on,
I'm not emotionally prepared.
You are a press person.
Yeah, but
you must have read the synopsis going in there.
It was one of the times I walked in, and I do this a lot because sometimes I just want to see where a story will take me, but I was not prepared to walk in to see a Holocaust story with that much.
But it's still your responsibility. It's still your responsibility. This is the game you signed up for, to see everything, you know, and it's all throughout its context. You know, you can't pick and choose. In a way you can, but you can't be like, I didn't want to see it because it was too emotional for me. It's like, no, people want to hear your take on it.
Well, I watched it. I watched this. I didn't say I got up and left. I just said I wasn't mentally prepared. If I would have known I was coming to see a Holocaust movie in the middle of the day, I would have probably had a different thought process. But my point, all of that, and I was going to ask Charles, same question I asked Wilson, have you been having challenges, and how are you able, as Wilson likes to use the phrase, compartmentalize and kind of look at it and go, okay, yeah, well, I know what it is. It's the job.
Well, for me, I know that there's a significant difference of responding. Everybody has a individual a response to trauma in different ways. So some films, when I go in, I'm like, I'm cool with it. I can set it aside. I know it's just a film. I can handle it. But when I saw a film, Anthony Hopkins, The Father, and I knew what The Father was about, but because I'm also experiencing this in my life, I have a father-in-law who is going through the same things.
Wow.
It hits you a little bit differently. And so when you come out of a film like that, you have to talk with somebody. I have a therapist I talk with. I have family that I talk with. And sometimes you gotta sit down and say, man, this really affected me in a certain way, and I need to decompress. And sometimes it's talking to somebody. Sometimes it's I just got to turn on a Marvel film and just veg out on something that's gonna bring me some joy. But so it's always challenging in that sometimes, like Tim said, you're not specifically sure what you're getting into when you go into the movie. I knew what The Father was about, but I didn't know how well he was going to do that role and how intense it was going to be. And so all the preparation in the world wasn't enough for what I went through. So all that to say, I agree with Dr. Walks in that you have to have a support system for when that you can enact immediately. I've called people as soon as I've come out of films before and said, "Look, I just saw this, and it's taking me for a loop." So I can do the compartmentalization, but sometimes you got to go past that, and I'm glad that I have a system that allows me to decompress.
So Dr. Walks, Charles makes a really good point about how things hit you, because we talked earlier about you and the Coen brother film, A Simple Man, that was a trigger for you. I've shared with you off air, and I think I've shared it on air, about how the film AI affects me every time I watch it because of the relationship that I have with my mother. And every time I watch that movie, that last scene, I am just sitting in my house like, oh my God. So I think it is, and it's interesting because when I heard Charles and I was just listening to Wilson, I almost feel like, and I mean, I don't know if the studios would ever do this, but I do think you should make people available for critics to talk to, or in any given field. You should make mental health professionals available for folks to talk to, because people are all dealing with these universal subject matters, and you never know how one thing will affect one person versus the other person. Wilson may be cool with something, Charles is affected. Charles might be cool, Tim is affected. So I mean,
Well,
again, Dr. Walsh, I give it to you.
I think actually it's our own responsibility to take care of our mental health. We
So
can't
you
be
say, so
delegated.
you on the Wilson side of this? It's your responsibility.
We can't delegate our mental health to someone else. We have to take steps in our own lives to secure our mental health, and whether that be friends, family, professionals, whatever, what may have you, you can't rely on someone to provide it for you, because you may never get it. So if it's important to you that you have mental health, then you need to invest in that. That's my personal view.
Okay, Dr. Walks.
So, so I will defend to the death your right to have your individual reaction, your right to have your individual needs, and your right to have your individual solutions. And it may not have sounded like it, but I think Wilson and Charles really delivered the same message. Um, I'm a military veteran, and I do a lot of work with veterans. And you'll have two people in the same foxhole experience the same thing, see the same horrible stuff. The human body is very fragile; it comes apart very easily, and people are impacted by that differently. One person will come out of the foxhole, and the next thing you know, they're given inspirational talks and they're starting a multi-billion-dollar corporation, and the other person crawls out of the foxhole and crawls into a bottle because it impacted them very differently. Same event, same time, side by side, very different impacts.
Wow.
And so I respect what Wilson is saying in that, yeah, you know what you signed up for. And at the same time, because Wilson is able to compartmentalize, because Wilson is able to keep it moving, doesn't mean that you have to be able to compartmentalize and keep it moving. And so Charles is talking about how he does the same thing Wilson does. How do you emotionally and psychologically survive this trauma that we just witnessed? Oh man, I'm on to the next thing because I can handle that. Somebody else, yeah, I experienced it and I stopped and called my therapist. Nothing wrong with that. And I think that's really the challenge for us, right? The challenge for us is to be able to respect very different ways of managing something that is in. No, Wilson never said, oh, it was no big deal. He never said that it didn't bother me. He never said, oh, I saw it and it didn't matter. What he said is, I have my way of dealing with it. And as long as he has a way of dealing with it, much love, much respect, because he is recognizing that it is something that can be managed. And he, I think, because he knows and loves and respects Charles, he's like, hey, Charles, if you need to stop and call your therapist, brother, I'm with you. Go ahead, do what you got to do. I'll see you at the next movie. Right? So that's what this is about to a large extent, is us being able to respect each other's needs. And what you said, Tim, about maybe the studios can make help available, the studios know. I started off by saying, decades ago when Boys in the Hood came out, they had psychiatrists come in and pre-screen the movie so they would have some notion of what the psychological impact would be. They know that. You know when you're reading a script that there's going to be some sort of an emotional impact in what's going on. So it's not like it's a big secret till it hits theaters. I think these kinds of conversations where we're talking about what kinds of impacts and then what kinds of preparations we need. Wilson tossed right to you, Tim. Hey, you mean you didn't read the synopsis? You didn't get girded up before you went in there? It's a reasonable thing. It's a reasonable thing for us to get a synopsis, know what we're stepping into, have that little kind of a take a breath, say a prayer, whatever it is that works for you, that gets you prepared for what you're going to do, and then on the back end, know how you're going to get out of it by having a place to unload, a place to unwind.
You just mentioned, Boys in the Hood, and think about it, it's like that last scene, everybody remembers the Ricky scene, you
Mm.
know? And, even though there's other scenes in the movie, everybody knows that Ricky scene, because it's something that happens in life, and it happened a lot during that time. And so like people recognize that, and it did affect a lot of people emotionally. And then you can go to other movies that, that you think about, Glory and Denzel, when he got whipped, or we all know, Kunta Kinte, you know what I'm saying? Like those lasting memories can get you because, like I said before, there are things that we've read about, whether it be in the news or in the history books, but, it doesn't really have an effect on you because if you're not living through it or you haven't experienced it, these are just words, and there's no way of visualizing it until you see a film and you're like, now I get it. Now I know. So when Tim said, 13 and you're now getting an idea as to what was going on, and Ava did it so magnificently that it's revered. It's like, yo, she showed the plight that these people are going through, and sometimes, hey, you need to unwind and take back. I just like, hey, because I've seen other things, or like, it's like, okay, let me go on and take a break, maybe a minute, maybe an hour, maybe a day or two. Next thing, because I guess it's like a job. It's almost like when somebody plays a basketball game, you lose by 2 points. Like, hey, we got to come back tomorrow. Put that to bed. Think about what mistakes you made. Come back tomorrow. We got another game to play. So there's different ways of people, rationalizing what they say and how it meant to them.
So Charles, I remember Nell Minow and I sat in the theater and we watched Fruitvale Station, and I never forget that final scene when he's laying in the morgue and talking about Oscar Grant. And I think Octavia Spencer played his mom, and she's sitting there saying, he looks cold and he's alone. And I remember Nell and I just boo-hooing next to each other Ivan also knows that, one of the best pick-me-ups after you see something like that, I got to go and watch a comedy. I might go listen to Richard Pryor, or I might go watch something. I might.
We always do that.
Something. But yeah, so is that a preferred coping mechanism, Ivan, that you would recommend, despite the fact that Wilson Morales, a Cornell graduate, has offered up his suggestion? What would you say as a USC graduate, Dr. Walks?
Well, I don't want to start the whole East Coast West Coast thing all over.
You see, Tim, he up there throwing. I was like, I don't throw education out there. Tim wants to make it look like I'm number one. I'm like, maybe
I'm just saying, Ivy League, man. He's an Ivy League dude, Ivan. I mean, I'm just saying.
You know what? Let me say this. Much love and much respect for Wilson. Period.
Morales.
And I think that when we take time to go through some things, like going to Cornell or going to USC or going anywhere, you go through some things, and I think we bring that to where we are, right? Sometimes you have to compartmentalize to get through that class where the professor calls you the night before the exam. This happened to me, and said, I know you're watching basketball tonight because it's the NCAA, but I hope you're studying for your midterm. I'm like, are you calling the white boys and telling them that I know you're watching basketball? Is that really what's happening to me right now? So
psyching you out.
look, we go through life, and things happen to us, and those of us who, one of my favorite words, those of us who can persevere, get to a place where somebody is making jokes about us going to Cornell, but there's something about that perseverance that matters. And so I want to go back to what Charles said, because it is important. It really is important that we understand who we are, and we understand what our needs are, and that we find a way to get those needs met. It really matters. And then the one thing I want to get to, because I know the show is not 3 hours long, it's really important that we find a way to move positively with the things that matter for us. I know this is not a psychology show. At the same time, it's a show about things that impact us psychologically. And so if there are ways for us to get out and march and protest, ways for us to contribute to an organization that does the things that we think matter, ways for us to meet people who are like-minded and create something that's going to be available to people who are struggling in a way that we've seen in the movie, all of that helps us to process what's going through, and helps us to put the energy that comes out of us when we get impacted by something in a way that is positive and in a way that is useful. At the end of the day, gentlemen, at the end of the day, all of the stories about Black folks struggling in America are stories of triumph. Yes, we are still getting abused by the police, but they are not hanging us from trees everywhere with little kids pointing up and smiling like those pictures we have all seen. We have made some progress. And I think we have made some progress because when we are impacted by those things, we build an African American museum where we can go and we can know that we've come from. Anybody who's been in there knows that when you go in, if you go from the bottom to the top, you see that journey that we've taken as Black folks in America, right? So I don't want to leave here with just us saying these are horrible things and we got to get over it. I want to put it in that larger context of where we are. So all those slavery movies, all those negative things that we see, even the things we see today, and the reaction today, right? I mean, look, what happened after we watched George Floyd get tortured to death on national television about 80, 11 million times, and on social media about 80, 11 million times, right? People began to say, enough of this. We have to do something. So whole social justice movement. Look, I don't want to rant, but Tim, you know I do rant. I think the bottom line is this. Those stories in today's context allow us to see that we have made progress from where we were to where we are, and at the same time, brothers being willing to get on social media, to get on television and say, hey, I talked to my therapist. I call somebody. Just like the brothers who say, I've learned how to compartmentalize. There's room in our society, in our culture, for both approaches. And at the end of the day, it's whatever works, man, because we got work to do. Wilson said we got another movie tomorrow. So whatever works, whatever works.
Hey,
All right.
got a movie
Later,
tomorrow.
Wilson.
What's the next thing to watch? The like next movie up. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Like,
sometimes it's the next movie's in an hour. So you know.
yeah, we've done that. This is the professional we live in, where you're like, you got back to back, and it's tough. Like when you see a movie like 13th, and then you like your next one is like something like totally comical, and you're like, all right, I don't know if this is gonna be like way off like this, or it's like, you just need something to kind of even it out. But sometimes, hey, maybe that's the cure. Like, I just saw this movie that, but that was very tough. But the next minute, hey, I was bawling laughing, so it balanced out the tears.
Well, it's funny. I was going to say everybody on this phone call, including Dr. Walks, has gone to film festivals where you watch several movies in a day, and it's funny because Wilson will go, well, it's your responsibility to read a synopsis. Man, when you at Sundance and TIFF, man, you just going to the movies, man. I ain't got time to I just know it's got this person in it. This is what I think it's about.
Well, there are times you walk in there and you're like, no, why am I still here?
That's what I'm saying.
Like, what's going on? Like, you look at it, watch
wait a
it.
minute,
I
what?
walk out, will everybody see me? Because I'm black. You know what I'm saying? I will be noticed. Like you walk in there like, oh, I didn't know this was like foreign, no subtitles. I was like, oh.
Well, I will share this story with Dr. Walks. He and I once went to a screening of a film called Teeth. Remember this? And I'm talking about it is the only movie in my almost 30-year history that when we were leaving, generally as a rule, there's always someone from the studio there, rep, who will say, give me your reaction to what you watched. Man, it's the only movie I ever watched. We walked out the door. Ivan, am I telling the truth? I'm so sorry you came to see this movie.
Right.
It was hard. Wilson, did you ever see Teeth?
I saw Teeth. It has its audience. It's like
no, it doesn't.
It has its audience for nobody who's on this show today.
Here's the thing: when these movies are out there, because you saw it. Now you saw it at a festival. I saw it when it was coming out in theaters. That meant, somebody picked it up.
It came out in theaters?
It was in
theaters. That's how I know that. I didn't see it at a festival, which means if it came out in theaters, there's enough powers that be to say, listen, we can put this in 2,000 theaters and people will come out and see it. So before, just like anything else, just like music, just like plays, musical or drama, there's a tryout period. So somebody must have said, hey, we got the test reports, it's rating pretty high, let's put it out there. They didn't put this in like 4 theaters and let it grow like Dolomite. They were like, nah, they were like 2,000 theaters.
No, I would agree. I would agree that there's an audience for every movie. And I've learned that as a rule, I try to stay. The only genre that I actively will pass on are those horror slasher movies. They don't work for me. And I'm a person who's very sensitive. So I don't want that stuff in my emotional Rolodex. Don't want that in there. And matter of fact, I need to update that statement because Rolodexes don't even exist anymore. So Wilson, I get off air with you and you can help me on the update on emotional whatever I need to be using right now. But gentlemen, I want to thank all of you guys for coming on today. Wilson Morales, who was typically being black today, who showed up on CP time.
This is what happens when you have a lot of work to do. Like, I got to come in there. It's like, oh, okay. I could have said no.
Ivan's face.
Personal foul, unnecessary roughness.
Wilson gets me as much as I get him. People just don't see Wilson ever get me. We were on a call this morning. Didn't you take some shots at me this morning?
No, I don't think so. I don't remember. That's the thing. I channel it out. Next.
Okay, channel it out. Charles, I'm gonna leave Charles with the last word because Wilson has selective memory.
Oh man. I've said it before. And when you go into these movies, take the time to read what it's about before you get there. Prepare yourself, but most of all, your mental health is yours. Make sure you take care of yourself, however that is, whether it's a friend, family, therapist, someone professional. Do what you need to do. That's all I'm going to say.
Dr. Walks?
I agree with what Wilson said. I agree with what Charles said. I agree with what you said, Tim. The diversity in our community, in the critic community, the diversity in the Black community, the diversity in the American community is something that's real. And the more we can accept our differences, the better we can all function together.
All right, and Wilson, do you want one more final word before we let you go?
Nah, just, see a good movie. If it affects you, see another good movie. If it affects you, see another good movie. You find one after the other. Depressing, comedy, drama, whatever fits you best. He's like, well, at the end of the day, like, I saw a good movie, and it wasn't the one that I cried about.
All right, well, before we get out, that's it. I want to thank all you guys for coming on today. Dr. Walks, it is a pleasure. We don't have you on enough. We need to get you back on a quarterly basis because this is crazy.
Nah. I already got my field doctor talk. Let's talk about movies next time.
Wilson Morales, tell people where they can see.
Of course, Tim, you say.
I'm going to be texting you and be like, I don't need another session today.
Wilson Morales, tell people where they can follow you and read your content.
You can find me over at Black Film and TV. Look for all different things, whether it's movies, TV, theater talk. Yes.
All right, and Charles Kirkland Jr., where can people listen and find your stuff?
Well, first of all, thank you, Dr. Walks, for classing up to join. Everybody else is in T-shirts, but
that's what I'm saying. He wanted to find himself, doctor.
You can read me at FilmGordon.com, and all my musings are at the DC Film Life. That's on Facebook and Twitter.
And Dr. Walks, do you have any CNN, MSNBC appearances coming up?
Not today, Mr. Gordon. Thank you, sir.
As I tell you guys in closing every week, please see something good at the movies. And as these guests have said today, your mental health is your own responsibility. And I will take that onto myself as well. Until next week, we'll see you guys on the other side. Thank you guys all for coming on today. And that is episode 444. See you guys next week.
Take care, folks.
Yeah.
Bye.